What if a simple family dinner turned into public humiliation and uncovered long-buried secrets? Sarah was thrown out of an upscale restaurant, a victim of discrimination, but what started as an act of injustice quickly set off a series of unexpected events, including a reunion with someone who could change her life forever. Get ready for a powerful story about courage, second chances, and the search for truth. How far would you go to protect the ones you love and face the ghosts of your past? Sarah Collins was used to an exhausting routine. Raising a child alone while working endless hours at the hospital was never easy, but she did it with pride. She was a dedicated mother and an admirable professional. This was one of her rare free moments, and all she wanted was a quiet meal with her son. She decided to stop at an upscale restaurant, drawn by the cozy atmosphere and the promise of a good meal. Sarah and her son Jack entered the restaurant, a sophisticated place with crystal chandeliers and a predominantly white, well-dressed clientele. The sound of muffled conversations and clinking silverware filled the air. Sarah felt the discreet glances of some customers as she passed by, but she ignored them. She wasn't there to be noticed, only to enjoy a meal with her son. As she approached the reception desk, her polite smile contrasted with the cold expression of the waiter who greeted her. The waiter, a white man in his 40s, looked Sarah and her son up and down. His smile was forced, and his gaze carried a tone of veiled superiority.
Good afternoon. Do you have a reservation?
No, but I thought maybe I could get a table for me and my son.
The waiter paused, his expression hardening slightly. He cast a subtle glance toward the manager, who was observing the scene from a distance. He hesitated, as if evaluating Sarah and her son's presence there. There was no rush to accommodate them, only an uncomfortable silence that began to spread through the room.
Well, our tables are usually reserved in advance. And to be honest, perhaps a more casual place would be more suitable for you and the boy.
Sarah lifted her chin slightly, maintaining her composure. She knew what that tone implied, but she refused to give in to discomfort.
We're here to have dinner, just like everyone else. That shouldn't be a problem, right?
The waiter gave a half-smile, but there was a stiffness in his eyes, as if he had already decided the outcome before Sarah even finished speaking. He gestured toward the manager, who approached with firm steps. The manager, a white man in his 50s, approached with an authoritative posture. He looked at Sarah and her son as if they didn't belong there.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm afraid we don't have a table available at the moment. All our reservations are filled.
Sarah looked around and saw several empty tables scattered throughout the restaurant. She turned back to the manager, incredulous.
There are empty tables. Can you reserve one of them for us?
As I mentioned, those tables are all reserved. Besides, we have a policy of maintaining a certain standard of experience for our customers. Perhaps another place would be more suitable for you.
Sarah's face hardened. Her son, holding her hand, looked up, sensing the tension. The discrimination was subtle but clear. Sarah hadn't just been rejected. She had been judged. It was as if her appearance, her skin color, and even the fact that she was a single mother determined her place in the world. And, apparently, that place wasn't here.
Are you turning us away because you don't think we belong here?
Not at all, ma'am. We're simply suggesting that perhaps a more casual environment might be more comfortable for you.
Sarah took a deep breath, pulled her son close, and walked toward the door, pausing for a moment to look back. Sarah left with the feeling of having been reminded of her place, a place that society still tried to define for her. But what the restaurant staff didn't know was that this incident would be the starting point for something far greater than they could imagine. Sarah and her son walked through the bustling city streets, the sound of traffic and conversations in the background. She held her son's hand firmly, her steps quick and determined. The incident at the restaurant had shaken Sarah deeply. It wasn't the first time she had faced discrimination, but there was something different this time, an indignation she couldn't ignore. Those judging glances and veiled words of contempt still echoed in her mind. She couldn't believe her son had witnessed it. Sarah stops at a nearby park, sitting down on a bench. Her son runs to a nearby swing and starts playing. She watched her son on the swing, a smile on his face, unaware of what had happened. Sarah wanted to protect him from everything, but she knew she couldn't always prevent him from being treated unfairly because of the color of his skin, and that reality consumed her. Sarah picks up her phone and makes a call. She knew that if anyone could understand her, it was her Aunt Marie, a strong woman who had raised her like a second mother, teaching her never to stay silent in the face of injustice.
Sarah, dear, what happened? You sound worried.
We were turned away from a restaurant today, Auntie. They didn't even try to hide it. They said there were no tables available, but I saw several empty ones. They just didn't want us there.
Sarah's expression hardened as she recounted what had happened. As Sarah told the story, she felt indignation rising in her chest. The discrimination she faced wasn't just hers. It was part of a long, painful history her family knew all too well.
You can't let this slide, Sarah. I know that restaurant. They think that just because they have a fancy setting, they can choose who they serve. We need to do something.
I know, Auntie, but what can we do? They'll just say it was a misunderstanding, that I'm overreacting.
No, you have a voice. We have a voice. This isn't just about you. It's about not letting them tell us where we belong.
Aunt Marie's words brought an unexpected clarity. Sarah knew she couldn't just let the incident be forgotten. She wasn't just a tired woman after a long shift. She was a mother, a worker, a citizen who demanded respect, and her voice needed to be heard. Sarah sits at the kitchen table in her home at night, with her son already asleep. She looks at her phone and opens a social media app. The night was quiet, but Sarah's mind wasn't. The humiliation she had suffered at the restaurant still haunted her. She decided she needed to share her experience with the world, so others would know what was happening.
Today, my son and I went to La Cuisine. We were met with looks of disdain and turned away, even though there were several empty tables around us. They told me the restaurant had a standard to maintain and that a more casual place might be better for us. It was a clear case of discrimination. I refuse to stay silent about this. We need to talk about racism and class prejudice, even when it's subtle.
Sarah presses the post button. The response was immediate. Hundreds of people began sharing Sarah's story, expressing outrage and solidarity. Others, however, questioned what had really happened, doubting the truth of her words. Sarah sits on the couch with her phone in hand, reading comments on social media. She was preparing to deal with the fallout when she received a call from Marcus, a longtime friend and well-known activist in the community.
Hey, Sarah. I saw your post. I'm so sorry about what happened. We're with you, and we need to use this opportunity to expose these practices. Let's organize an awareness campaign.
I was afraid it wouldn't be taken seriously. Some people are already saying it was just a misunderstanding.
People always try to downplay these situations. We can't let that happen. I'll organize a peaceful protest in front of the restaurant. We can't let them keep treating us like second-class citizens.
Marcus and Sarah gathered community members, painting signs and discussing protest strategies. Community support kept growing. Sarah's incident had awakened a dormant awareness in many, and the movement began to gain momentum. But what Sarah didn't yet know was that the restaurant, so rigid in its policies, belonged to someone she would never have imagined. The protest in front of the restaurant is in full swing. Signs with messages like "Dignity for all" and "No more discrimination" are raised high. Sarah and Marcus stand at the center of the group, leading the chants as local media cameras capture the demonstration. The protest outside the restaurant had become a symbol of resistance. Sarah's incident wasn't just about one woman being turned away. It was about an entire community refusing to accept discrimination, subtle or not. The restaurant was now at the center of a storm that seemed to grow with every moment. The restaurant manager watches the protest from inside, his expression worried. He speaks on the phone with someone, explaining the situation.
Yes, sir. It's a mess out there. Some media people are here too. I'm not sure how much longer we can keep this under control.
While the manager tried to contain the damage, a distinct figure appeared in the distance. A black man in his 50s, wearing an impeccable suit, walked toward the restaurant with a serious, determined expression. James approaches the restaurant, walking firmly as he observes the protesters and journalists. He is followed by an assistant who looks concerned. James was not a man who let himself be swept up by chaos. He had a reputation for handling matters quietly and effectively, but when he heard about the protest outside his restaurant, he felt the need to step in personally. The story he had read on social media deeply unsettled him, and he wanted to understand what had really happened. James walks through the crowd and stops in front of the manager, who looks relieved to see him.
Mr. James, we're trying to handle this. There was a misunderstanding with a customer, but we're already taking steps to fix it.
And what exactly was this misunderstanding?
James looks at the manager and then turns his attention to the protest. He notices Sarah in the middle of the crowd, holding a sign that reads, "Everyone deserves respect." When James's eyes locked on Sarah, there was a brief moment of hesitation. She seemed vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place where he knew her from. Something in her expression made him pause, as if a distant memory was trying to surface. James walks towards Sarah, ignoring the manager, who tries to keep up with him. He stops just a few feet away, and Sarah, noticing his approach, lowers her sign and looks at him with curiosity and a hint of distrust.
Are you the woman who wrote about what happened here?
Yes, that was me. My son and I were kicked out of here because of discrimination. Who are you?
James keeps his eyes fixed on Sarah for a moment, as if trying to figure something out.
I'm the owner of this restaurant, and I'm here to understand what happened.
The crowd around them falls silent, watching the interaction. The manager steps back discreetly, sensing the tension in the air. Sarah hadn't expected the restaurant owner to be a black man. It added a layer of complexity to the situation. But she knew that the incident she had experienced couldn't be minimized, no matter who owned the establishment.
If you're the owner, then you need to know that I was judged and humiliated here. I was told the restaurant had a standard to maintain and that I didn't fit it. Is that acceptable to you?
No, that's not acceptable. I'll get to the bottom of what happened. I want to hear your side of the story.
James looks at the manager, who stands in the background, and gestures with his head, signaling that he wants to speak to him later. Then he turns his attention back to Sarah.
Please, come inside. Let's talk.
Sarah hesitates for a moment, but James's expression seems sincere. She decides to follow him, with Marcus and some of the protesters watching closely. As she followed James into the restaurant, a strange feeling came over Sarah. There was something about him that seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Little did she know that this meeting would reveal far more than just the issue of discrimination. Sarah and James step into the restaurant, the door closing behind them as the atmosphere shifts to an almost complete silence. The restaurant is empty, except for a few staff members watching from a distance. James leads Sarah to a table by the window, pulling out a chair for her. The restaurant felt very different now that it was empty. The lack of customers made the place feel even colder and more formal. Sarah sat in the chair James pulled out for her, but didn't relax. Her body was tense, her eyes locked on the man in front of her. James sits across from her, adjusting his posture to show that he's listening attentively.
I want to start by apologizing for any negative experience you had here. That's not what I expect from my staff.
It wasn't just a negative experience. It was humiliation. It was discrimination. My son was with me and saw how we were treated like we didn't belong here.
James's face hardens at the word humiliation. He realizes there's more at stake than a simple incident. James had experienced handling complaints and knew that customers' perceptions often differed from reality. But there was something in Sarah's voice, something that made him hesitate before responding. She spoke with a pain that felt familiar.
I understand what you're saying, and I deeply regret that you and your son went through that. I know what it's like to be treated differently because of appearance or skin color.
Then why does it happen here? In a place you own, that you run?
James looks away for a moment, thoughtful. He pauses before responding.
The truth is, I'm not always here. I delegate a lot of responsibilities to my manager and staff. But that's no excuse for what happened. I take responsibility.
Sarah studied James's every word, trying to determine whether he was truly sincere or just delivering another rehearsed speech. Yet there was a subtle emotion in his voice that seemed more genuine than she expected. Sarah takes a deep breath, trying to control her emotions. She looks at James intently, as if trying to decipher something.
You said you know what it's like to be treated differently. Did you grow up here in this town?
James is caught off guard by the question, his face showing a hint of discomfort.
Yes, I grew up here. I moved away many years ago, but I know this town well.
There was something about the way James answered that gave Sarah a sense of recognition, as if a distant memory was trying to surface.
I grew up here too. I never left, actually. Maybe that's why it's still so hard to see things like this happen and do nothing.
I always thought people who grew up here would eventually leave, looking for something different. But it's admirable that you stayed.
Sarah nods, reflecting on something he said. There's a moment of tension in the air, but she decides not to follow that path in the conversation. James takes a deep breath, resting his elbows on the table and clasping his hands. He looks at Sarah seriously.
Sarah, I want you to know I'll investigate this thoroughly. If my manager or any staff member treated you improperly, I'll make sure action is taken. This can't happen again.
And how will you guarantee that? How will you prove they haven't done the same thing to other customers who look like me?
Sarah had touched on a point James couldn't ignore. She wasn't just demanding an explanation for what had happened to her. She was asking for the restaurant to be a safe space for everyone, without exception.
We'll implement training sessions for the entire staff. And I want you to be a part of it. I want you to help us understand where we're failing.
You want me to help fix your restaurant? Is that it?
I want you to help us make a difference. I know this doesn't erase what happened, but I'm willing to start somewhere. And you seem like someone who isn't afraid to fight for what's right.
Sarah leans back in her chair, crossing her arms. She stares at him for a moment, as if considering the proposal. James's proposal was bold and unexpected, but at the same time, Sarah felt there was something more to the story, something he wasn't saying, and perhaps something she wasn't ready to admit to herself. James stands up and extends his hand to Sarah. She hesitates for a moment, but then stands and shakes his hand.
I'll get in touch with you in the next few days to talk more about this idea, if you're willing.
I'll think about it. But I want you to know that I'm still very skeptical about all this.
That's fair. I just hope I can earn your trust.
Sarah grabs her bag and walks toward the exit. Before leaving, she glances over her shoulder at James, who watches her from a distance. As Sarah left the restaurant, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strange about all of it. The familiarity in James's eyes, the way he seemed genuinely disturbed by what had happened, and the sound of his voice, which seemed to carry more memories than she wanted to admit. James watches Sarah leave, and as soon as she steps through the door, he exhales deeply, as if something heavy was weighing on him. For James, Sarah's presence stirred something buried in his past. He still couldn't understand why, but there was a connection there that he needed to uncover, a truth that would soon come to light. Sarah walks through the city streets toward her apartment. The evening is starting to fall, and the sky, painted in shades of orange and purple, reflects the thoughtful expressions on her face. The conversation with James had left Sarah unsettled. There was something about the way he looked at her, as if he was trying to remember where he knew her from. She also felt a sense of familiarity, something that seemed buried deep in her memory. Sarah enters her apartment, a simple and cozy space. Her son is in the living room, playing with building blocks.
Hi, Mommy. How did it go?
It was different, sweetheart. But everything's fine now.
Her son's hug brought a brief moment of comfort. Sarah felt his warmth and innocent joy, but her mind was still unsettled. Memories of the past began to surface in flashes, disconnected images that seemed to want to come together to form a clearer picture. Sarah sits on the couch while her son continues playing. She pulls out an old memory box from the closet and places it on the coffee table. Opening it, she finds photos, letters, and mementos from her youth. The box held remnants of a time Sarah had long tried to forget. Among the faded photos and letters from old friends was a period of her life when she was a young woman full of dreams and a little more daring. It was during this time that she met James. Close-up of an old photo of Sarah standing next to a young man. Although James's face isn't clearly shown, it's evident that young Sarah is laughing and happy in the picture. They had a brief but intense romance, full of promises for a bright future. But like many young loves, their relationship didn't last. When Sarah found out she was pregnant, James had already left town for work, and their contact gradually faded. Sarah places a photo back in the box and closes it with a sigh, her gaze drifting off into the distance. The pregnancy had been a surprise, but Sarah never hesitated to keep the baby. She decided to move forward on her own, without ever reaching out to James again. She wasn't sure how he would have reacted, or if he even wanted to be part of that journey. And, in some ways, that uncertainty still haunted her. Sarah picks up her phone and calls Aunt Marie, seeking advice from someone she has always trusted.
Sarah dear, are you okay? How did the conversation with the restaurant owner go?
It was interesting. He seemed sincere about wanting to fix the situation, but there's something more.
What do you mean, something more?
When I saw him, it was like I knew him. And the way he looked at me, it was like he was trying to remember something too. I don't know. Maybe I'm just imagining things.
Aunt Marie furrows her brow, as if she's trying to piece things together too. Aunt Marie always knew more than she let on. She knew Sarah's past, knew about her relationship with James, but wasn't sure if it was the right time to reveal everything. Instead, she decided to let Sarah reach her own conclusions.
It might just be a coincidence, Sarah. Sometimes our instincts make us think about things from the past. But stay alert. If he's being sincere, then you should take this opportunity to make sure he does the right thing.
I'll do that. But something tells me I haven't seen everything there is to see yet.
Sarah sits at the kitchen table, writing notes in a notebook. She is preparing for the next meeting with James, where they will discuss changes the restaurant can implement to prevent future discrimination. As Sarah jotted down her ideas and demands for the meeting with James, she couldn't shake the growing anxiety. There was something more to this story, something deeper than just a case of discrimination at the restaurant. She felt like her past was about to collide with her present in an unexpected way. Though committed to the fight for justice, Sarah knew the real challenge would be keeping her mind focused on the present and not letting herself be overwhelmed by the memories that had started to resurface. But something told her that the truth, a much older truth, was still waiting to be uncovered. The restaurant is once again empty, except for a few staff members in the background. James is seated at one of the tables near the window, reviewing some papers. He stands up as he sees Sarah enter. This time, the atmosphere felt different. The restaurant no longer exuded the same coldness and distance. It was as if the situation had caused the place to lower its guard, much like the two people who were about to meet again. Sarah approaches with firm steps, carrying a folder filled with notes and documents. James nods to greet her, but he doesn't hide the attentive look with which he observes her.
I'm glad you decided to come back. I hope we can have a more productive conversation today.
I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. I hope you're truly ready to change.
James gestures for her to sit. Both take their seats and lay their papers on the table. There was tension in the air, but also a mutual curiosity. The looks they exchanged seemed to be more than just professional assessments. It was as if each was trying to read between the lines of the other, something still left unsaid. Sarah opens the folder and takes out several sheets of notes, placing them on the table.
I've prepared some suggestions to improve the restaurant's policies. Regular anti-discrimination training is essential. Also, I think it's important to create a space where employees can discuss inclusion and equity issues.
I completely agree. I've also thought about implementing a zero-tolerance policy against any form of discrimination, with clear consequences for violations.
Sarah looks at James approvingly, but her eyes suggest there's something more she wants to say. As they discuss the measures, Sarah's tone softened. She realized that James seemed genuinely committed to making changes. Yet, There was still that lingering feeling of familiarity between them. James pauses mid-discussion, as if he wants to ask something personal, but hesitates.
Sarah, I hope this doesn't sound intrusive, but you said you grew up in this town. Do you know it well?
Yes, I grew up here. I never left, actually. And you? You said you left years ago. Why did you come back?
I had to come back to deal with some family matters and ended up staying longer than I expected. This town has a strange way of pulling us back, doesn't it?
James's response was casual, but the way he looked at her wasn't. There was something in his gaze that seemed to be searching for confirmation, as if trying to connect the dots of a distant memory.
Yes, maybe. It seems like everyone who grows up here always comes back in some way, even if just to visit the past.
They exchange a prolonged look, but turn away at the same time, as if unwilling to admit the familiarity beginning to surface. The restaurant door opens and Sarah's son enters, running toward her. He holds up a drawing he made at school, showing it off excitedly.
Mom, look what I drew. It's a race car.
James watches Jack with a slight smile, but his expression gradually shifts to something more serious. When James saw Jack, something in him changed. There was an instinctive recognition he couldn't explain. The boy's face, his expression, seemed to remind him of someone, but he didn't know who. Jack runs to a nearby empty table and starts coloring with some pencils. James watches him for a moment longer before turning back to Sarah. James keeps his eyes on the boy for a few more seconds, as if something is beginning to emerge from his memory. James and Sarah return to discussing the measures, their tone more relaxed than before, but the underlying tension still lingers.
We'll implement your suggestions and make the necessary adjustments. I want you to feel comfortable continuing to guide us through this process.
If it means the restaurant will truly change, then I'll keep helping. But I'll be paying attention to every step.
Although the meeting ended on a cordial note, there were still unspoken questions and unexpressed emotions. Sarah and James both felt they were only at the beginning of a much more complicated journey than they had anticipated. The past seemed to be closing in, and soon the truth would reveal itself, whether they were ready or not. Sarah back in her apartment, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea in her hands. She watches her son playing on the floor with his building blocks, her thoughts drifting back to her recent conversations with James. The meeting with James had stirred memories Sarah had buried long ago. As his face and her son's blended in her mind, she began to notice a resemblance she hadn't deeply considered before. There was something about James, something in the way he looked at Jack, a silent question that seemed to beg for expression. But now, with him back and closer than ever, Sarah felt she was about to find out if fate had orchestrated their reunion for a reason. Sarah picks up her phone and calls Aunt Marie once again. Her face is serious, her eyes thoughtful.
Auntie, I need to talk about something. About James.
You saw him again. What happened?
Yes. We're trying to fix the issue at the restaurant, but I think he's starting to suspect something. He looked at my son in a way. It was like he knew.
Sarah, I've wondered for a long time whether you should have told the truth. But I understand why you didn't. What do you plan to do now?
I don't know. I'm not sure of anything.
Aunt Marie had always known the family's secrets, but chose to let Sarah walk her own path. Now, with the past threatening to resurface, it seemed like only a matter of time before the answers became unavoidable. Meanwhile, James sits in front of his computer in his office, scrolling through social media and online searches. He types Sarah's full name and searches for information about her. James's mind couldn't rest. He needed answers. He knew digging into Sarah's past might feel intrusive, but the questions were consuming him. He wasn't sure what he hoped to find, but he needed to uncover more of the story. He comes across an old profile of Sarah's on social media, showing a picture from years ago of her holding Jack as a newborn. The image didn't confirm anything, but it brought him closer to a truth that was beginning to take shape in his mind. Jack was the right age, and there was something in his features that fed James's growing suspicion. Later, Sarah lies in bed, trying to sleep, but her mind won't stop racing. The restaurant is closed to the public, with dim lighting and only a few tables occupied by staff cleaning the space. James and Sarah meet in a conference room adjacent to the restaurant, a table with documents spread out in front of them. The conversation they started about restaurant changes felt slightly unfocused, as if there was something more important to be said, something neither of them knew how to bring up. Both were aware of the unspoken questions hanging in the air, but hesitated to be the first to voice them. James stands near the window, looking outside as he speaks.
We're making progress, but I wish things were moving faster.
I do too, but we can't rush it. We need to make sure everything is well implemented to create lasting change.
Sarah watches James, and for a moment, there's an awkward silence. She senses he's hesitant to say something. Sarah could feel the shift in the air, a growing tension that made her think James was about to address something personal, something he had been avoiding, just like she had. James slowly turns to Sarah, his expression serious and determined.
Sarah, I don't want to overstep, but ever since we reconnected, I feel like there's something unresolved. Maybe it's just my imagination, but your son, how old is he?
Sarah's face grows serious, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She hesitates before answering.
He's 7.
James's tone suggested he was doing the math in his head, trying to align dates and memories. His gaze fixed on Sarah made her feel there was no way to avoid the subject any longer.
Why are you asking that, James?
Because when I look at him, I see something familiar. And it's not just the physical resemblance. There's something about his mannerisms, his eyes. I can't help but think there's a possibility I never considered.
The silence in the room became almost palpable as Sarah struggled to find the right words. Sarah lowered her head and then looked back at James, her expression serious but with eyes slightly teary.
James, when you left, I found out I was pregnant shortly after. I couldn't find you, and I didn't know if you'd even want to be part of a child's life. I chose to move forward on my own.
You never told me. Why didn't you try to find me? Why didn't you say anything?
I thought about you every day, but back then I was scared. I didn't know what you'd say or think, and as the months passed, I convinced myself I could handle it alone.
James ran his hands over his face for a moment, absorbing the revelation. He stood up and paced the room, visibly shaken. Sarah's confession hit James like lightning. Everything he thought was settled in his past now felt like a lie. He wondered how different things could have been if he had known, if he had stayed. James stopped and turned to Sarah with a resolute look.
I want to get to know him, Sarah. I want to be part of his life if you'll let me. I don't want him to grow up not knowing who I am.
This isn't something we can figure out right away. I need to think about what's best for him.
I understand, but I can't ignore this possibility. Let me at least try to get closer to him.
Sarah looked at James with a mix of hope and uncertainty as she considered the idea. She didn't know if she was ready to let James get closer to her son, but she knew that one day Jack would want to know about his father. And with James showing a willingness to step up, maybe it was time to take that first step. Sarah stood up, picking up her folder with notes. She looked at James for a moment before speaking.
Let's take it one step at a time, James. If it's for his benefit, we can try.
With that decision, a new journey began for Sarah and James. The truth about their past and the impact of their choices was beginning to surface, offering an opportunity for redemption and a new chance to build something together. A local park on a sunny day, filled with families strolling and children playing. James arrives and parks his car near the spot where Sarah and her son are already waiting. It was the first time James was meeting Jack outside the formal setting of the restaurant. He was nervous, something unusual for a man used to handling negotiations and workplace pressure. But this was different. It wasn't a client or an investor in front of him. It was a child who could be his son. James approaches Sarah and Jack, who is playing with a toy car. Sarah smiles politely, but her eyes reveal a mix of apprehension and hope.
Hey, champ. How are you?
Hi. You mommy's friend.
That's right. Your mom told me you like race cars. I like them too. Want to show me what you've got there?
Jack nods and hands the toy car to James. They sit on the grass while Jack starts talking about his favorite cars. Seeing the excitement in the boy's eyes as he talked about cars brought an unexpected lightness to James's heart. He still didn't know what the future held, but at that moment, all that mattered was Jack's smile and the bond that was starting to form. Sarah sits on a nearby bench, watching the two talk and play. She holds a water bottle, gripping it lightly as she tries to control her emotions. Sarah wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting. Part of her feared James wouldn't connect with her son, but watching how naturally they interacted stirred something in her heart, a cautious hope she didn't want to admit, but that grew with each of Jack's laughs. James and Jack continue talking, and Jack runs off to grab another car, leaving James and Sarah momentarily alone. Sarah knew that sooner or later, her son would start asking questions. But for now, she was content to watch his joy as he spent time with James, free from the pressure of having to explain everything. She needed time to figure out how to introduce this possibility into Jack's life. The sun begins to set, and Sarah calls her son so they can head home. They get up and start walking toward the car, with James by their side.
Today was amazing. I hope we can do this again.
I think he liked the idea. We can plan another day. Sure.
Jack lets go of Sarah's hand and runs off to grab a toy he left on the grass, leaving Sarah and James alone for a moment.
Sarah, I want to be part of his life, if that's possible. I'm not saying it will be easy, but I want to be honest about my intentions.
There are still a lot of things to figure out, James. I just want to make sure this is what's best for him. I don't want him to get hurt.
Neither do I. And that's why I want to do this the right way.
Their conversation was brief, but full of meaning. There was much more to be said, but they knew they had to take it one step at a time. As much as the past weighed on them, the present offered a chance to start again. James watches as Sarah and her son get into the car, waving as they drive away. He stands still for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking thoughtful. For James, that day at the park was more than an attempt to connect. It was confirmation that he wanted to be part of Jack's life, no matter the outcome. There was a connection there, something that couldn't be ignored. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had the chance to make things right. As she drove, Sarah knew there was far more at stake than just her and James's past. Her son's future was on the line, and she had to be strong enough to face whatever came next. But seeing Jack smile that day, even if just for a moment, planted a seed of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. The past few days had been different for Sarah and her son. Since the park visit, Jack hadn't stopped talking about James and race cars. Sarah saw the sparkle in his eyes every time he mentioned his new friend, but she also knew the questions would start coming soon.
Mom, has James been your friend for a long time?
Yes. We've known each other for a long time, but we hadn't seen each other for years.
He's nice. Can he be my friend too?
Of course he can. He really likes you. Why are you asking?
I just liked him. It feels like he likes being around us.
The sincerity in Jack's words touched Sarah. It was clear he was forming a bond with James, and that only made her more unsure of how to explain the truth when the time came. But how could she explain something so complicated to a 7-year-old? Sarah knew the time to tell the truth was approaching. She feared Jack might be confused or hurt, but she also knew he had the right to know his story. At the same time, she didn't want to put James in a position where he felt obligated to take on a role he might not be ready for. Sarah and James calmly discuss how they will tell the truth to their son, planning to meet again at the park, where they can talk to him in a more relaxed environment.
Let's tell him together. I think he deserves to hear the truth in a way he can understand without too much pressure.
I agree. We need to be careful, but also honest. I want him to know that no matter what, he is loved.
Sarah looks at James with a slight smile, as if finally letting go of the weight of years of silence. With the decision made, there was a new path ahead, an uncertain road, full of challenges and discoveries. But now, for the first time, they were ready to walk it together for Jack's sake. It's a sunny day, and the sound of children playing fills the air. Sarah and James walk side by side, with their son running ahead, carrying his favorite toy car. For Sarah and James, the park was no longer just a place for fun. It had also become the setting for important revelations. The truth they had kept hidden was about to be shared with the boy, and both felt the weight of that responsibility.
Mom, what are we doing today?
We have something important to tell you, sweetheart. Why don't we sit down for a moment? James and I want to talk to you.
The three sit on a bench under the shade of a tree. Jack looks at James expectantly, then turns back to Sarah. Sarah takes her son's hand gently, looking directly into his eyes.
Sweetheart, remember when you asked if James had been my friend for a long time? The truth is we knew each other when we were younger, before you were born.
Before I was born.
Yes, champ. And there's something important we want to tell you. I'm more than just your mom's friend. I'm actually your dad.
Jack's eyes widen as he processes the information, a mix of surprise and confusion on his face. James's confession lingered in the air for a moment as Jack tried to understand what it all meant. He looked at Sarah, then at James, as if searching for silent confirmation that this was real.
You're my dad. But why weren't you here before?
It was complicated, sweetheart. James and I weren't together when you were born, and we lost touch for a long time. He didn't know you existed until now.
If I had known, I would have been here from the start. I'm so sorry I wasn't, but I want to be part of your life now if you'll let me.
The boy looks at both of them, his eyes welling up with tears. He squeezes Sarah's hand tightly, seeking comfort. Emotions ran high. For Jack, the idea of having a father he had never met was hard to process. He felt love and loyalty to his mom and wasn't sure how to respond to James's sudden presence. Sarah wraps her son in a hug, gently stroking his hair.
It's okay. We both love you very much, and James wants to be here for you. But you don't have to decide anything right now. We'll take it one step at a time.
I know it's a lot to take in all at once, but I'd love to get to know you better and teach you anything you want to learn. We can spend time together, no rush.
Are you going to stay around?
Yes, I'll stay. I promise.
Complete acceptance wouldn't come immediately, but Jack's desire to get to know the father he had just discovered was clear. He had doubts and fears, but there was also a spark of hope in his eyes. Sarah, James, and their son get up from the bench and start walking through the park. Jack holds Sarah's hand while James walks beside them, respecting the boy's space. The revelation had been just the beginning. For Sarah, James, and their son, the journey of understanding and adjustment was only starting. There were many challenges ahead, but also the promise of happiness and wholeness. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was filled with opportunities to build connections and heal wounds. Life had given this family a second chance, and they were determined to make the most of it. Over the following week, James begins visiting Jack more frequently, taking him to school sometimes and helping with homework. These small moments of progress reassured James and Sarah that they were on the right path. Jack still had his doubts, but trust was slowly beginning to grow. Later that night, after their son had fallen asleep, Sarah and James sat together on the porch, gazing at the stars.
You know, Sarah, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had known from the beginning, if I had come back sooner.
I wonder about that too. But I don't think we can live in the what-ifs. We're here now, and we're doing our best.
You're right. And what matters most is that we're doing this together. I just want to make sure I never miss another important moment.
There was strength in moving forward, and she was ready to embrace this opportunity. Sarah, James, and Jack's journey was far from over, but every step they took toward unity and genuine love was proof that they were on the right track. With effort, patience, and care, they were building a family capable of overcoming any challenge. The following months brought the highs and lows of any growing family. But with each passing day, the bonds grew stronger, doubts turned into trust, and Jack learned to count on his father being by his side. The family they were building was a result of difficult decisions, honest conversations, and an unshakable desire to be present for one another. In the end, it wasn't just about revisiting the past. It was about creating a future full of promise and hope together. What about you? What would you do if you had the chance to rewrite an important part of your story? Would you have the courage to face the past to create a new beginning? Let us know in the comments which part of the story touched you the most, or what lesson you took away from it. We love hearing your thoughts. And if you enjoy emotional and inspiring stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.